Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today's episode number 35. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko. I am a former immigration lawyer and now the founder of an immigration tech company called Laborless, which automates H-1B compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which brings you this show. I'm really excited for today's episode because we've got as our guest Dick Burke, the CEO of Envoy Global. So Envoy Global is one of the largest, if not the largest, I don't know, but immigration tech companies out there in the world. Envoy Global is a really cool business model. They are a tech company first and foremost, but they partner with two really powerful immigration law firms that also then together work to, one second. We got a problem here with LinkedIn. All right. Well, so we've got so Envoy Global does an amazing job bringing together immigration law firms, immigration law support with technology support, and they're doing big things. They're growing like crazy, and I'm really, really excited to have Dick here as our guest to talk about all of their growth. So, Dick, thank you so much for joining and for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time and just I know you're busy, so really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, Roman, for having me. I'm flattered to be here, excited to be with you. And I got to say, really grateful for the role you play getting the word out about immigration technology. I deeply believe, you deeply believe in the power and the benefit of immigration. I think we also deeply believe together in the role that technology can play to improve the process. And I can think of no one who's been more of a acolyte or proponent of immigration technology than you. So I'm delighted to be with you, and thank you for all you do, truly.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it's it's one of these things. It's a big industry, but for some reason, it doesn't get the time and the wave frequency on the news rate on news and things like that I think it deserves. So I'm just really excited and frankly inspired. There's so many. We were just chatting before we went live. There's so many founders, some of whom, of course, are very well known in the industry, but there are many, many people building technology, working on technology that supports this industry. So I'm just, lucky to be able to talk to people like you and hear about it. So one thing I wanted to say was for folks listening, give yourself a quick shout out. Let us know where you are. Let us know where you're calling from. Leave some comments. Would really love to, get the conversation going, of course. And if you have any questions for Dick or myself as we go on, please drop them in the comments. Also, people don't know this, but my water bottle that I drink out of every single day, I got in your office. So this is not a sponsored post. This is not a sponsored video. This is just a great water bottle. So thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad you're using it.
Oh yeah, it's great. It's really good.
What do you got there? What's in there, Roman? It's
water. I swear to God, it's water.
I know.
If I'm blurring by the end of this thing, it's not water. So as I always say with this show, and we talked about it a little bit before, we can talk forever about the company. But I think the story of the leadership at each immigration tech company is important because this is an industry that's always evolving. It's not political, but it also is tied in with politics. It's tied in with just the global movement of people. And so I think it's really important to talk about the individuals, such as yourself, who are kind of at the helm of all this. So you're an immigration lawyer. And this is also a really fun episode because the company Envoy Global used to be, it was called VISANOW. We'll get to it. And we actually had the founder of VISANOW on the show. So to me, what's really cool about this is almost like a part two for the company, right? Which I'm just super excited. It's really unique, and I'm pumped about that. But before all of it, you were a corporate attorney, but in Chicago. You're based in Chicago. Are you from Chicago originally? Were you born and raised in Chicago, or like what's the story?
So the deal is, I grew up in Chicago, western suburb, right outside the city. I went to high school in the city, went away for college, and then went to Georgetown for law school, and came back. I always knew I wanted to be an attorney, Rowan. My dad was an attorney, and I worshiped him growing up, and it seemed like what lawyers did was cool, and what he did was cool. And I was much more of a English history guy than a math science guy. And so I just always wanted to be an attorney. And I was lucky. I went to Georgetown. And then I came back, and my dad had a firm, but I thought if I went straight to his firm, I would be a little bit like Daddy's little boy. And I thought it would be better if I went to another firm and tried to earn my stripes. So I was lucky. I went to Skadden Arps, which is a big New York firm that had an office in Chicago. And I was in the corporate department, which was probably what they were best known for. And it was a terrific experience. I was there 3-4 years, very, very long hours, hard work. But the training at its essence was something that really, really stuck with me. It was, they said, the best lawyers are solution providers. And it's not about, mastery of this or that. You have to find a way through mastery of the details and experience and creativity and hard work and perseverance. You've got to find a solution that makes it work. And that's what distinguishes the best lawyer. And that always really stuck with me, because so often lawyers will say no. And the best lawyers, in my mind, are the ones who can find a way to say yes through that combination of creativity and experience and proper calibration of risk. And I love that. And so I was there, and then I went to work for my dad's firm. And at my dad's firm, I was lucky. I got invited to go do some work as an outside lawyer for a business that became Classified Ventures. And Classified Ventures ended up, it was owned by the newspapers, and they were trying to manage the migration of classified ads, Roman, from newspaper to print, to newspaper to online. And the newspapers knew this was coming, and they knew it was going to be an existential threat, but it was, how do you use technology to try to preserve the business? So we created apartments.com and cars.com. And I went there first as the outside lawyer, then as the general counsel, and then as the administration guy. And then I was lucky, I got to run our real estate business and then our apartments business. And that migration was fascinating to me. And I loved that migration because as I think about lawyering is about providing solutions, but it's also about like identifying risk. Mm-hmm. And what I came to love about business, you have to be mindful of risk, but it's also much more about identifying opportunity. And I think that's one of the things that unites you and me. We think there's such an opportunity in this immigration tech space. So finding opportunity, utilizing technology to solve a problem. There's got to be a better way to find a car or an apartment than looking in the newspaper. And it really stuck with me how through technology we could make it easier for people to find that car or find that apartment and get into a house, et cetera. And it was a powerful testament to me about tech. And also it was very powerful, the role that that the foreign nationals had at our company. I saw firsthand the contributions they made to our business, and I saw the hell they went through trying to get their work authorization and get all their questions answered. And that really sort of stuck with me. So long-winded answer, but at my core, the idea of being a lawyer and trying to provide solutions really resonated. And then getting exposed to tech and how tech can improve things sort of combined really set me up for what ended up when I joined VISANOW.
When you were, you're growing up, you said your dad was a lawyer, he had his own practice, and you said he always wanted to, I suppose, to be a lawyer. Did you ever have sort of entrepreneurial or business oriented tendencies too? Because, there are all sorts of types of lawyers. And it takes a certain type of lawyer to also be confident in their business skills and their leadership skills, because there are other brilliant attorneys who are just good at, trial work or things like that. Were you kind of like the lemonade stand kid or anything like that when you were younger, or what do you remember about that?
I wish I had been, but I wasn't, to be honest. And that's why I've got so much respect for Bob Meltzer, for instance. Bob had the idea that there's a role for technology to play in the delivery of immigration services. I'm not very good at coming up with the idea, to be totally frank. I think I'm better at taking an idea and trying to improve it and evolve it and simplify it. But I was never that guy. And I have such respect for the people, A, who can generate that idea, like Bob, and then B, who have the courage of their conviction to say, you know what, I'm going all in on this. And I don't have either to the extent of the Bob Meltzers or other founders, whether it's in immigration or not. So I have enormous respect for people. I just don't have that gene as much as I wish I did.
So can you talk a little bit about, because I do want to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
I know you think you gave a long-winded answer, but I want to dive in and make it
Awesome.
longer.
Right.
So and that's totally understandable. And frankly, I think that there has to be a really good partnership between people who generate ideas and people who execute, right? I mean, there have to be operators, there have to be people who see the vision and who have the skills and abilities to A, execute themselves, and then B, to lead teams to execute. When you were in law school, I mean, did you ever, and again, I'm asking this because I'm curious and I want to get to that point where you were like, okay, I can either continue my career as a lawyer or I can do this, right? You obviously got there eventually. In law school, did you ever have any inclination there that you would kind of ever want to run it? Like, were you interested in business, I guess? Or, yeah.
Yeah, no, not as much as I'm sort of surprised I didn't. I knew as a lawyer, I was going to be a transactional lawyer, not a litigator. That's sort of the fundamental split in lawyers. Either you're a litigator or a transactional one. I knew I wanted to be transactional, so I kind of like business, I guess. But I never took any, and I took all the standard business classes you take in law school, but I didn't take any of the MBA level classes at Georgetown because I always thought, again, because of my attraction to what my dad did, that I just assumed that I'd be happy being a lawyer. So it really didn't start until I, as an outside lawyer, began working and setting up this business that became Classified Ventures and getting an office over there and seeing what businesses did and how it sort of came to me that it's like doing a Rubik's Cube. You're constantly trying to solve this puzzle, and you could do one thing and that would have another consequence, and trying to get it all into harmony, I found much more intellectually stimulating and interesting than being a lawyer. But it came late to me, and I wish it were earlier, and I wish I could have generated the idea like a Bob or a Julie Pearl for that matter. But I just never, I just didn't have that gene.
I'm kind of like you. I mean, I guess you could look and say, I left the practice and I started a company. But when I was in college, when I was in law school, I was just dead set on being an attorney. I was never the kind of lemonade stand kid either, which is, I guess, yeah, once you get exposed to it in some other way and you realize how actually interesting it is, the problems, how creative you can also be, I think, as a business leader. It's really fun because you can utilize your skills as an attorney, of course, in pretty traditional matters where you're looking at contracts and you're kind of doing that kind of stuff, but you're also utilizing these creative skills of just, you got to solve a problem. You have to come up with a solution. There's no right or wrong. There's just do it and let's see what happens, kind of.
Exactly. And timing's everything in life. And the timing just didn't happen for me when I was, a teenager in college. But those elements, like you just said, of solving the problem and using creativity, there's also an element of business that I love that was about getting people together and getting them to work in concert and unity towards something greater, which I really enjoyed. And it certainly didn't come easily for me, but I brought to that, maybe through extroversion or whatever, perhaps some of the gifts you have, I found that I could do that, or I enjoyed trying to do that, and that made it easier. Because the other challenge I had as a business guy, still have, is I don't come as a sales guy or a tech guy or a product guy or a marketing guy. I'm sort of someone who says, okay, this I think is the right strategy. We're going to work together hard. We're going to hire good people, and we're going to have treat people right, and we're going to consistently try to improve every day. And it's not the most revolutionary idea, but I find it just so stimulating and positively stimulating, trying to figure out what the problem is and how do you get people to solve the problem together.
Yeah, and I think, we could probably talk about leadership sort of for the whole hour, but I think in a way that a leader sort of has to be able to empathize with different parts of the solution and then bring them together in a way that is cohesive, right? Because I guess I'm similar, right? I'm not a product guy, I'm not a tech guy, but I know enough about all of them to be dangerous and to also spot the right people and sort of spot the kind of issues. So I totally empathize with that. I want to just make a note here before we move on. We got a few people here. So Marianne is calling in or watching from sunny San Francisco. Says, I want one of those Envoy water bottles. We'll come to Chicago then. You got to visit Chicago. Jacob Sapochnik says, great show. Thank you, Jacob. Gabby, as always, a long time, I guess, follower, listener. Thank you, Gabby. Ready for this show. Me too. Jeremy, excited for this. Thank you, Jeremy. Susan Ginsburg, leaving a bunch of questions. Thank you so much, Susan. Really appreciate that, saying she loves the lemonade stand metaphor. So please keep the comments coming. Let us know if you have questions, especially as we dig in, particularly once we chat more about kind of the Envoy global piece of it. So all right, you're in corporate, you're at Skadden Arps, big firm. You're obviously doing sort of corporate work, and then you move that, and then so after that you moved to your dad's firm, right?
Exactly. That's a great mid-sized, a more regional firm based in Chicago with a broad range. I was again a corporate lawyer there. Wonderful people. Hours much better for my personal life. Slightly smaller deals, and when I was there was when I got the opportunity to go do the legal work for Inform, this business that was classified ventures that was owned by the newspapers that wanted to come up with some type of online solution, Roman, to what was going to happen to print ads. The newspapers were smart enough to know that print ads were going away because of the internet, and that the classifieds were really right in the bullseye of the internet companies. So they had to do something. So they said, instead of doing it separately, let's create national brands, pool our data together, and go from there and use technology to try to retain revenues. And it turned out to be a great, fun job. And I loved it. And there I sort of began to develop my sense of leadership. You talked about it for a second. And two things that really stuck with me in that period. One was, I've told this story once or twice to others, is I was trying to make the switch from being a lawyer to a business person. And I was so mindful that I didn't have an MBA, and all these people with MBAs or CPAs were talking this language I didn't understand. And I was 35. I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to catch up and I'm never going to figure it out. And I got to have dinner one night through a charity auction of all things. My wife and I with Jamie Dimon, now the CEO of Chase, one of the nation's most famous, most respected CEOs. And the four of us went for dinner, and he could not have been nicer. And he said, asked me about my business. I said, I'm trying to make this switch. And I said, it's hard though, because I don't have an MBA and I don't understand, I don't really know. I said, what advice would you give me, Jamie? And he paused for a second and he said, you know what, don't hire any assholes. And I couldn't tell if he was being serious or sarcastic or flippant. And you could sort of see this quizzical look on my face. And he said, no, I'm serious. He said, listen, you don't need an MBA. Hire really good people, make sure they're rowing in the same direction. Do not tolerate any a-holes, and generally good things will happen. And that was one sort of leadership lesson that really, really stuck with me and has generally served me pretty well. And then the other one that dawned on me, maybe related to that, is I realized I want to be the boss that I'd want to have. Mm-hmm. And that would be a boss that would who would understand me, know what drives me, knows what I want to do with my career, was respectful of my time, let me try new things, didn't embarrass me, commended me in public, gave me pretty candid, corrections or suggestions in private. Would be fun. And that has been the other thing that's tried to guide me. And I try to be that kind of a boss. Doesn't mean you treat everyone the same at all. You've got to treat everyone individually. And that helped me in lieu of getting an MBA.
Yeah, that resonates. That resonates really, really strongly. I've been hearing a lot about, this idea of like, if you want your company to grow and you want to be a good leader, you basically have to understand where, and it's tough, especially as a company grows, but you have to understand where every single person is and what they want out of it. I mean, you could find two people who are equally as good at their job, but one of them is like, look, I love beekeeping at the end of the day. And sort of that's my passion. I want to do this job really well for the rest of my life, and I'm perfectly happy. Whereas the next person who's also really good at that same job is like, I want to keep moving forward. I want to grow. I want to start new things. And it's both routes are perfectly valid life choices, right? But knowing that allows you to help steer those people in the right direction and keep them equally happy. Right. So that when you promote the first person versus the second, knowing what they want, right, if that person's like, I want to beekeep, I don't want to be promoted, right? I'm actually happy here. Whereas the second person is like gunning for it. So yeah, I love that. It really does treat people. It treats people equally in the sense that everyone is equally cared about, but then you treat people as individuals in that you help them make decisions based on what they want out of life and out of their career.
What you'd want your boss to do. I'd want my boss to know I want to be a beekeeper, or I'd want my boss to know I want to climb the ladder. And both are equally fine. And you need, by the way, you need both in a good organization. And it falls to the boss to provide a compelling path for each of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Agreed. I love it. So I wanted to ask you this, because you were, it sounds like you were working in classified ventures as outside counsel first through your dad's firm, right?
That's right. Exactly.
And then you moved in as inside counsel. I'm curious about this because, I'm an attorney, but I came here as an immigrant. My family, we're not attorneys. I didn't have, I think I'm the first lawyer in our family. Actually, we have one in-law who's a lawyer, but otherwise I'm the first lawyer in the family. But it's awesome. I mean, to be able to work, if you have a great relationship with your family members and you can work with them, like that seems wonderful. Was it, I don't know, was it tough to leave? Like, was your father like, hey, I thought you were going to become a partner, or I don't know, was there any of that? Or were you like, look, Dad, this is what I want to do. It's a great opportunity. And it was like, what do you remember about that kind of transition? Because it wasn't just leaving law for a job. It was leaving a family practice or type of thing.
Without a doubt. And you're very perceptive to ask. And I remember it sort of indelibly in my mind, Roman, because the name of the firm was Burke, Warren, McKay, and Saratella. And it was the same Burke, by the way. It was my dad. And so his name was the first name on the door. And there was probably about 80 lawyers there right now. So it's a nice size firm. And I was one of 4 children. I was the only one who had a law degree. So it was clear that I'd be the only one who could end up working there. And I started doing the work for this company. And then they said, come get an office over here. And I got an office over there, still employed at my dad's firm. And I started to realize I was really starting to like it. And I kind of liked the buzz of a business and the buzz of a startup and the sense of opportunity and possibility that you really didn't have at a law firm. You had other things at a law firm, but this sense of shared enterprise going after big opportunity was powerful to me. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, God, how do I do this? And I said to my dad, he could probably sense it coming. And I went one day and I said, Dad, I realized they've offered me a job as a general counsel. And as much as I love the firm, I realized I really want to do this and try to make a career of it. I really love the idea of being in a company and helping it grow. And to his credit, he said, listen, you found what you love, go do it. He could have taken any number of other responses that would have made me feel guilty or said you can't do it, and he could not have been more gracious, supportive, empathic about the whole thing. And I'm always grateful for that, because I was clearly the only one in the family who was going to follow in his footsteps. Mm-hmm. And sort of leave the firm with his name, the first name on the door. He was really, really gracious and generous about that. And it's allowed me to be much happier in my professional life. And so I have enormous gratitude to my dad for that, for accepting that.
That's amazing. I'm as you're saying this, I'm kind of putting myself in my shoes, in his shoes rather, and like imagining that I had a child with the skills that could to sort of move my business along, and I've been running this business for a couple of decades, and I don't know how I would feel. I mean, it is, you're right. It's not that I one way or another, but I just don't know. I can't. It's a tough, So yeah, much respect to that, and it also shows, I think, the importance of having, this is the kind of leader you want to be that you've mentioned. That's sort of what you're witnessing here, is someone saying like, this is the thing that will be best for you. And even if I have some personal stake in a different outcome, the most important outcome is the outcome that's best for you, not for me. And so I want to help make that happen, which I think is, kudos. I mean, that's awesome. That's really cool.
I really call it selfless leadership. That was, deep down, he might have been relieved I was leaving Roman.
Right. Yeah.
In any event, you're right. It's, it happens to all of us. You lose good people, but you got to support them. So thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, no, for sure. So cool. So at this point, you've moved over your in-house counsel, and you were at this company for over a decade, I believe, right?
Yeah, like 14 years from 98. It's like 16 years from 1998 to 2014. And so think of that. We saw the crash of 2000. We saw the crash in 2008. You think about 2008, what industries were impacted? Automobiles, check, we were exposed. Housing, check, we were exposed.
Yeah.
And so real ups and downs, but it turned out to be a great business. But it was so, cars.com, I was not nearly as involved with at all. That turned out to, go public at about a $3 billion valuation. Apartments, we ended up selling to a company in Washington called CoStar. And it was just so fun that we all could grow our careers together, and we all got married there, and we all had kids there. And it was really a magical, fun time. And now some of those people I get to work with at Envoy, I'm really lucky that way.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think, especially for folks who might be listening who are perhaps immigration or global mobility tech entrepreneurs and thinking about growth for the industry, it now in hindsight, cars.com, apartments.com sound like no-brainers, of course, but perhaps at the time, especially around these crashes, it was probably like, wow, what's going to happen? I'm curious, sort of, I don't know. I mean, there's probably a lot, but what are some of the things that you think you kind of learned from, let's just say initially from the apartments.com boom and then sale eventually to CoStar? I mean, what are some of the things, because that was the first time for you going through that and helping lead this organization through an acquisition. What did you learn from going through challenging times with the company to presumably bouncing back and then getting acquired?
Yeah. Wow. A couple things. One, and it sounds trite, but the criticality of people. If you could hold on to good people, you could make it through tough times, and you'd have a sense of shared sacrifice, and you'd have a perspective that there's booms and there's busts. And having good people at your side can really make it a lot better. So that was certainly one. Second was the need and the criticality of execution. We talked about operating and executing at the beginning versus just the vision. When the chips are down is when you really got to execute. And you think about what happened in 2000, the bubble burst, all these companies ran out of cash. The ones that were slow to respond and slow to throttle back their spending perished. And you had to have that courage to say, okay, we're playing the long game. We're going to cut back here. And it was brutal. I mean, letting hundreds of people go. Then in 2008, with our exposure to housing and autos, those were our two businesses. You know what happened there. You've got to be able to, even though, you got to have rose-colored glasses on for part of your job, but for the other part, you got to have the sort of green, the accountant's eye shades on to see what's happening financially. And the message to me there was you've got to be prepared and be prepared to make the hard decisions, because those who hesitated probably waited too long and might have lost out. When those hard decisions come, I guess a third lesson would be, Chicago is ultimately a small town. You got to treat people right and treat them fairly, so that, when things come back, maybe you can work together again. You get one brand in your life, and you don't want your brand to be you're a jerk, or you're difficult, or you're not good for your word. So when the times are tough, you really got to be honorable. And then, I don't know, I talk about this with my wife. I just recognize your good fortune. So many people, it galls me, just don't seem to recognize their good luck. And I was just lucky. I went to a company that turned out to have good URLs and some good money behind it, and just recognizing fortuity of that was to me another big takeaway. Some people just never really seem to realize that they're born on second base or third base. And it's unfortunate they don't see that the role that luck played in their hand.
Totally. I'm there's a lot of discussion often about hard work versus luck, and people say you make your own luck by putting yourself into position, and that also makes a lot of sense. But we sometimes do forget about the foundation. I mean, as an immigrant, and now we're in the immigration industry, just being here, just being in America, being born here, or being born to a family that moved here successfully is, in many ways, there is some luck there. I mean, it could have been any other number of things. And, I
say to my we got two sons, you could have been born 5 miles west of here or 5 miles south of here, where we live in the city, and your life would be wildly, wildly different. And that's just luck. And I'd be so bummed if they ever lost sight of that.
Yeah. I want to ask you one question about, what this sort of journey you just mentioned. I mean, you definitely talked about layoffs I'm assuming both at apartments.com and cars.com. I mean, that's always a really tough decision during hard times. Were there other tough decisions, at least that you can share? Because we're still going through a challenge, economic challenge right now. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But I think an insight I'm learning now for the first time, but you've clearly seen a couple of times with the 2000 crash and 08 crash, is that, things come and go, and sort of the economy ebbs and flows, all other things notwithstanding, like COVID and just, people losing their homes in 2008, like those are all, but just from a business perspective, things come and go. And so there has to be a long-term view. What are some of the other kind of tough decisions that people can think about now, that maybe folks are going through for the first time, and it feels like life or death, but from your perspective, it's like, you just got to make them and move on, because the business has to, like, what are some of those decisions, outside of obviously letting folks go?
Well, I'll tell you two other ones. When I was at Classified Ventures, one is we were all excited. Our genesis was the newspapers and the classified ad listings at the newspaper. So we thought we should get into general merchandise as well. And we bought the URL auctions.com. We thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have cars.com. We're going to have apartments.com. We're going to have auctions.com. This is going to be great. We got all the newspapers. This is before Craigslist took off. And sure enough, Craigslist took off and eBay took off. And notwithstanding the best laid plans, we were getting our clocks cleaned. And you've got to have the humility to say, you know what, this just isn't meant to be. And at some point, you got to stop, putting your finger into the pencil sharpener and just say it's not working. And we had to do that with auctions.com. Then we spent a lot of money to buy a real estate company, and we bumped into Zillow and Trulia. They had infinite amounts of money. And we realized, you know what, between Zillow and Trulia and the role the MLSs play with having access to all the housing data, that is not our sweet spot. So we had to have the humility to say, you know what, we made a mistake. We're going to throw the car into reverse and start over, other than, throwing good money after bad. At VISANOW, and I know we'll catch up to VISANOW, but same thing happened, initially when I joined VISANOW. One of the strategies was going to be to get into the family-based immigration space. And we staffed up thinking we were going to get into the family space. And we started doing some tech development around the family-based visas. And after about a year, 15 months, we realized this is not a good business for us. We're not good at it. We're not succeeding. And we had to have the humility to say, you know what? I made a mistake. This is not the end of the world. Better to reverse course now than later. So I guess the common thread is that old adage about when you're in a hole, stop digging. You've got to have the self-confidence and the humility to stop digging when those things happen, and realize life is going to be long. You're going to survive, but it's the people who become obstinate that can really pay a bad price.
Yeah, I love that. It is tough, especially after you've invested money and you've invested your sort of emotions into this vision, and all of a sudden it fizzles out, and it's like, okay, that's not the future anymore. We got to backtrack and keep going with what we're good at, and maybe refocus a little bit.
Exactly, and it's really hard because you get so invested in it, and you take it as such a ratification of you and your worth that when it doesn't work out, it can really sting. I do think that's an area where the West Coast, this fail early, fail often ethos in the West Coast, which has become a little bit trite. I think there's some real truth in that. But in the Midwest where we are, there's such a sense of pride in your work that it's hard, but they were good learning lessons for me that you gotta, if it ain't working and you don't see a clear way, you gotta move to something else.
I love it. I mean, these are such great lessons, I think, especially right now, given where we are in. Let's move on from there then, because I do want to get to it. So apartments.com was obviously acquired. And then you eventually went to cars.com, which now it was also it was like a portfolio company of Classified Ventures, it sounds like. And then that went public, right?
Yeah, I left apartments. When apartments sold, I left with it.
Yeah, right.
They said, you can stay as the president, but under new ownership, but you're not going to really have any responsibility. And I was like, oh God, I sort of realized how fun it was getting to be part of the decision-making team. And so I left, and I felt like that business sold for $600 million. And I felt like I was like the kid in Candyland who went from the top row of Candyland all the way down to the bottom, because I wanted to stay in Chicago. My wife and I were raising our kids, so I couldn't move. I didn't want to move. And I wanted to do something that would play to a little bit of my tech and legal background. And there weren't a lot of things. And so I joined VISANOW, and thank, Bob Meltzer for letting me join. And General Catalyst had just invested into the business. They put in some money, saying, "Wow, this is a very big space, and we think this could really be something." And that's what took me there. But it was a small business at the time. We did, I don't know, $8 million of B2B revenue the year I joined. So, and which is not insignificant, but it was a much smaller business than apartments. But it was a great opportunity to sort of combine that legal background and my techie background. And I'll always be grateful for General Catalyst and Bob Meltzer for letting me come.
So I want to ask you about that, because I think, for many people, there are a lot of folks in the immigration tech world who are, either immigration attorneys like myself, or maybe they went through the process, or they somehow sort of had this direct connection to it, and then either started their own company or rose in the ranks. It sounds like you almost kind of, I don't want to say stumbled upon this, but you weren't previously in immigration or global mobility. So I'm curious, how did that opportunity come up to you, for you to join the company? And also, almost perhaps more importantly, you took this offer. I'm sure you could have gotten a number of other jobs. Why, right? Like, why immigration at that time? Now I'm sure it's a different thing for you because you've been living and breathing this space. But at that time, why immigration? Why VISANOW?
Yeah. Well, I stumbled, man. That was your word. I did stumble into it in the form of a headhunter called me and said, "Listen, there's this company in Chicago. We know you want to be in Chicago. We know you got a law degree. We know you have had some tech background. This could be interesting." And as soon as I heard of it, I remembered like the hassles we went through at cars.com and apartments.com with foreign nationals. I was like, oh my God, it was just like this crazy, overly complicated, stress-inducing issue. The hiring managers hated it. The HR department hated it because they felt like they were playing telephone all day long with the attorneys and the foreign nationals. The foreign nationals hated it because they could never get straight answers from the lawyers. And that always dawned on me. And I heard about this, and I was like, wow, great backing in the form of General Catalyst, a successful founder, Bob Meltzer, a space like already tell was ready for disruption, and a recognition by me that I've had a pretty easy life because 120 years prior, a bunch of probably drunk Irishmen came over on a boat, and immigration has been good for the Burke family. And so I was like, wow, this could be really perfect. It was hearing about it was total fortuity, and then as soon as I heard about it, it's like, holy cow, this is like lucky me.
Wow, I really actually admire the idea that you connected your family's history, right, to immigration, because people tend to forget, for better or worse. You forget you've been here one or two generations, and it's like, I'm American, and you want to close the borders to other people, and not about politicals. We're not going to talk about politics, but just from the idea of like connecting yourself to. There was at some point, unless you are of an indigenous person, or you were brought here against your will on a slave ship. Otherwise, there were people who came here. There was somebody in your family who came here basically as an immigrant, right? And it's like, and we forget that. And I think we should remember that. So it's cool that you kind of mentioned that and noted that. So
I'll tell you a story. It beautifully said. I don't look indigenous. I'm not indigenous. So my family background, they were dying to come here, and I never lose sight of that. In our offices, or you've seen our offices, Roman, we've got these enormous pictures up, sort of 4 foot by 4 foot, ultra high definition, of all these people we've helped, actual foreign nationals we've helped, and they are as pale as me to as black as the shirt you have on, and they're all looking confident and assured and happy and ready to take on the world. And that like totally encapsulates to me the beauty of our mission of immigration, helping people live full, rich lives. We think that people are capable of great things if they're put in the right setting, and they're capable of great things. They need to be treated with dignity because of that, and that this job allows us to do that. relative to helping people find a car, an apartment, I mean, there's no comparison. But how people lose sight of their own immigrant background is really, perplexing to me.
Yeah, and it's I guess it's on us all to sort of continue that conversation so that we remind them. I mean, if you forget, here's a reminder. What's your last name? Who came here? Okay, your great grandparents, your great great grandparents. I mean, there was somebody, right? So at this point, so you joined. It was VISANOW. You joined, and then kind of we talked about how the company basically then rebranded, right? And then there was like a big fundraise. So what do you remember about those first few years? Because I think it feels like, after the fundraise, and you've just been growing, but I'm assuming a big fundraise like your Series C, and then of course changing your name, changing your brand. These are big events. What was it like during those first few years? Was it like you came in and it's just boom, all these crazy things happening right away?
Well, it was a pretty tumultuous 2 years. So I came in January of 2015. In 2015 and 2016, our strategy was to get into the family-based space. And we did a lot of testing. And one of the things that happened very quickly was we did all this testing, hiring, realized it wasn't the right space. And I had to go in front of this new team that we had built and say, I had made a mistake and we're not going to pursue this family-based thing. And so some people lost their jobs, and that was terrible. And the biggest challenge was I hadn't worked there for long, so they had no reason to trust me or believe in me. And so the first big decision was a bad decision. And trying to establish trust with people who didn't know you was difficult then. So that was one thing that happened. The other thing that happened was a couple of things really stood out to me. Getting back to my time at Skadden, where Skadden, they were so maniacal about client service. Back then, the model at VISANOW was that you'd get a different lawyer every time. So if you were on one case, you might have Roman answer the response, and then you might have another lawyer, Dick, answer the response, and then the third response might be done by Bob, and the fourth response by Sally, all on one case. So the client was getting a different attorney, every time they'd ask a question. And I was like, I get the fact that that'll drive responsiveness, but it certainly destroys the creation of attorney-client relationship. So one of the first things we did is we changed that model, and we said we're going to dedicate attorneys to teams, to clients, so they get to know their clients and get to understand the client's strategies, needs, personalities, issues. That was one big change. The second one was we said, attorneys, you're going to be expected to get on the phone, and you're not going to be able to hide behind the communication center. As great as it is, you've got to go travel, you've got to get on the phone, you've got to do meetings. All those things, again, a move towards the more traditional, you could argue, away from technology, but I felt it was core to creating a good relationship between the attorney and the client. The third big one is we got much more experienced attorneys. When I got there, I was already feeling old, but I was like, holy cow, these lawyers are so young and so junior. And I'm sure they had all the talent and potential, but they just weren't experienced enough. So we consciously brought in much, much, much more experienced attorneys. So now we've got a host of attorneys, 8, 10, 12 years of experience, because these sophisticated times require. So it was a lot of change in those first couple of years. And then we felt that the name change would be one way to try to suggest to the market that the business had really, really, really dramatically changed. It wasn't first come, first serve in terms of your lawyer. It wasn't really young lawyers. It wasn't lawyers that you could never talk to. That was one of the reasons for that name change, was to try to suggest the real evolution in our service delivery, none of which really had anything to do with technology, by the way, but all of which had to do about delivering a better service to the HR department and to the foreign national.
How did you kind of build trust during that time? Because I think, just before this, we were talking about leadership and leadership styles, but yeah, it sounds like you came in here and you all of a sudden had to make big choices. I'm sure some of which were not super popular among some people. Like, how do you do that?
It was really really, really hard, because in my last job, I'd been there for 15 years and people had gotten to know, and you develop a brand, right, and a reputation. And I couldn't rely on that in this new setting. So I realized I had to earn it. And I felt the best way to earn it would be to explain why I made the first decision, all the details that led to me to make the decision that we're going to try to get into, for instance, the family-based space. Then all the data that we learned that suggested it was a bad decision. So a ton of transparency, a ton of humility. I wasn't defensive. I wasn't blaming someone else. I owned it. So that was the second thing. And then the third was to assure everyone that those folks who were impacted and, their last day was that day, were treated fairly and honorably, and we do everything we could to get them jobs. So in the absence of a brand for trying to treat people well, it had to be around transparency, acceptance of my culpability. I wasn't defensive about it. And then insistence that, we were going to treat those people the right way. And then over time, good things happen, and the good things started to get more into people's memory, and they realized, okay, even in a crappy time, Burke at least tried to do the right thing. But it takes a long time. Now I've been there 7 years, and we're beginning to build up a better brand. And I think people, hopefully, we'll see what folks say, feel like, okay, Burke's at least good for his word, and he'll make plenty of mistakes, but he'll at least explain why, and we'll move forward. And on the whole, there's more positives than negatives.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think this would be a good time to ask you, how does Envoy Global work then? Because you talked about the communications center, you talked about having different attorneys. Many people probably know, but for those who aren't aware of how the business works as a whole, can you just walk through that a little bit? Because I think it would be cool to see, all right, how is it? And then sort of, I'm really curious to hear about your vision, moving forward. We're now in a different administration. There are new kind of things on the horizon for immigration. But right now, how does the company work? What should people know about it?
Sure. So the business is wildly different than it used to be. If you have an old notion of VISANOW, I'd really ask you to be open to reconsidering it. At its heart, what Envoy seeks to do is combine the best of lawyering. And we have 2 law firms we'll talk about in a second that we affiliate with. These law firms provide the legal services. They're 2 of the best immigration firms, I believe, in the country. And we pair that with our own technology, which we believe, which we've built ourselves. We've put, we're going to put, what is it? Well into the 8 figures this year into it. Next year will be even more. That by starting with great lawyering provided by 2 good law firms, and then augmenting that with technology, we can help companies improve their global mobility programs, the immigration part of that. So what we do is we go to a company, we say, hey, listen, we think we might be able to improve your immigration program by making it more transparent, more accountable, faster. We generally don't compete on price too much. And we do that by saying, we have 2 law firms. Which law firm do you like? We'd like you to meet the lawyers. We at Envoy will provide all the technology, all of the non-legal support, all of the global services. That's a huge area of growth for us, sending people overseas. We've got a global team of 20 now, 10 overseas, to deliver the service if people want to go from the United States to Canada, or if they want to go from Tanzania to Thailand, wherever, we can do that. And Envoy will do that. And we come together seamlessly to deliver the service. You get one bill, you get one technology where the attorneys, the paralegals, the non-legal service, the HR, the global mobility team, the foreign national all work together, and you end up with a process that we believe is better, faster, cheaper, simpler, easier. We compete with the Fragmans and the Bales and the Ogletrees of the world. These 2 law firms, we've always had one historically. It's now called Global Immigration Associates, Roman, and that's the firm that's seen a ton of change. The average experience level has gone from about 2 years to about 8, headed up by Sarah Herbeck, former shareholder at Ogletree Deacons. And then something we're really, really excited about, last year, you had a great article about, we partnered with a firm called, we affiliated with a firm called Corporate Immigration Partners, CIP. And that is the old Pearl Law Group. Julie Pearl sold the business to her 5 lieutenants. She retired. These 5 renamed the firm Corporate Immigration Partners, and they chose to affiliate with us. So all their clients are now utilizing our technology, and we will now go to market saying, listen, if you want to work with CIP, that's great. They're independently owned. They're a fantastic San Francisco-based firm. That will be your law firm, and their technology and global will come from Envoy, or you can work with Global Immigration Associates, the other firm. The 2 firms are totally separate from each other. They're both separate from Envoy, but we deliver the service seamlessly. The best analogy is when you go to the hospital, frequently the doctor's group is different than the hospital group. They come together seamlessly, but they're separate legal entities. We're sort of the same way, and we think the benefit is you get specialization. The lawyers aren't worrying about technology. They're not worrying about selling, and they're not worrying about marketing and billing and collecting. They can instead just focus on lawyering. And we at Envoy can do all that other stuff. So the lawyers focus on you and deliver you the best service.
It's a really interesting analogy. I like that. I haven't heard that one yet about, the sort of hospital groups, and working in hospitals. Yeah, they're often affiliated with the hospital, but they are their own separate businesses. In fact, there are businesses that staff like anesthesiologists, and they just basically kind of work together with several hospitals, for example. But anyway,
yeah. I hope that, I don't know if it's an analogy or a metaphor.
Yeah,
is right, but that's exactly how it is. They're totally separate. So CIP is totally separate from GAA. CIP is totally separate from Envoy. Same thing. They're all three separate entities, but we come together, Envoy and CIP, or Envoy and GAA, to give a seamless product.
I love it. Just want to take a moment to acknowledge a couple of comments here. So we've got Elizabeth Jamie saying hi. Hey, Elizabeth, good to see you.
Liz, she is one of the 5 founding partners of CIP, and big 10 years, I know, Roman. So thanks for listening, Liz.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Bojan, great podcast. Thank you, Bojan. Appreciate it. Janet Turner also loves the lemonade metaphor. Let's talk about the hospital metaphor too. Susan Ginsburg said servant leadership. This just harkened back to a little bit of what you said before. You lead by empowering others, really. And Gabby also agreed. Love the leadership lesson. Janet Turner says, awesome dad. So, you do want to teach the, important lessons. So for security reasons, this person's thing is blocked, but the one who moves to the bottom always gets back to the top. Take it from someone who's played hundreds of Candyland games. Yeah, thank you. And we have Marianne saying Envoy is so much better than VISANOW ever was, and she can vouch for the seamless process. And then Gabby also said she loves Envoy's webinars. The one that comes to mind is your interview with the Canadian immigration leader, inspiring to hear Canada's. That was a recent one, I think.
This is the Minister Mendocino. I don't know if you know him, Roman. Unbelievable. So I was doing this webinar with him, and it was almost hard to pay attention because what they are doing in Canada is so diametrically opposed to the prior administration. It was like unbelievable the way they're working with the states, with the provinces, the way they're working with local businesses, the way they're welcoming foreign nationals, and the way they're growing. It was mind-boggling. He was terrific. We want to get him back.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. And you guys are, so it's a good segue because you mentioned that you now have a global presence, growing global presence. You mentioned that you're doing some work, for example, into Canada. You talked about how the company has grown and shifted already with this partnership with CIP and expansion in that sense into the West Coast. Where do you see the company going? I mean, where do you, where do you see it growing, maybe with respect to the current administration, but perhaps just generally? What do you see for the future of the company?
Sure. Well, we're obviously, we think the new administration is going to be much more accommodating in terms of immigration. I'm sure there's unanimity around that with this audience. So we're excited about that. We'll see what it means, what he can get done without Congress, what happens with visa bulletins. It'll be interesting to watch. But as we think about the future, we think about a couple things. One is we're incredibly lucky, Roman, that we'll help tens of thousands of foreign nationals. An enormous percentage of them are STEM employees who have incredible ideas. Why no one harvests those ideas to try to develop the product is beyond me. So we listen assiduously to the foreign national feedback and get all sorts of great ideas. So there's going to be a real step up in investment. The tech team's investment is up about 77% this year over last year. That pace is going to continue because there are such great ideas that we get. So utilize, really blowing out the technology, never to replace the attorneys, but to augment the attorneys. So that's one big area of focus. Second, continued expansion into global. We're lucky as we grow, we're serving larger and larger customers. Historically, VISANOW sort of focused on SMBs. We now focus more on mid and enterprise size. As we do, they want us to help with global. So big investment into global. That's probably the second big hallmark. The team is up to 20 now. It's headed up by one of the CIP partners, who's now our head of global services at Envoy, Brendan Coggan. He's great. We got 20 people. That's going to keep growing. Number 3 is a lot around reporting and data because we're finding that the best service that we can provide is not just fill out the application and send it in, but to be much that literally the envoy, the strategic advisor to the global mobility department, helping them, connect the dots, come up with the right strategy, and execute a mobility strategy that drives their respective business forward. And one way to do that, beyond filling out the applications, obviously, and submitting them, is leveraging data and leveraging analysis to really empower that global mobility team so that we can be much more strategic. That's good. That's a big one. And you think about these forms. There's so much data in these fields that we get enormous amount of data and insights in capturing that and harvesting it so to enlighten and empower those we serve. We think that's going to be a really big one, and that's part of where that big technology investment is going to go. In short, it's going to be from being purely an attorney to more of a strategic advisor to the global mobility team. I think that's another big one we're focused on. And I do wonder about, ultimately there's got to be some type of synthesis between tax and relo and immigration. We talk about it till we're blue in the face. I think Robert Horsley at Fragment's a great advocate for it. Why we all are dealing with separate data fields and we're all asking for the same data over and over and over. That's crazy. And so I think Robert's been a great help to me. When we were Cars to Farms, we coordinated with our competitors to come up with a unified data source. So every landlord didn't have to give different data feeds to every different advertising platform. There was one, and we all took it. We have to get to something like that. I think it's in the interest of our clients, all serving the same people. Why we're making them go through all these hoops is silly to me. So that's something else we'd like to work on.
I honestly think that it's in the government's best interest too, because as we see now, there's always going to be a backlog. There's the resources needed to go through. Let's just talk about H-1B applications because we're in cap season. The resources needed to go through these physical, applications is insane. If we can sort of create a unified language around this stuff, it would be easier to plug that into various technology providers like Envoy Global. The registration process, for all its challenges, the H-1B registration process is still a step in the right direction. It is this ability to get your name in the hat electronically. Now, I'm not saying whether or not I agree with it or think it's good, but the idea is that it is some new form of tech service sort of with respect to immigration. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I feel like, the issue, you look at something like the EU where in many cases you actually can submit applications electronically. In some countries, I think Germany might have that. And the idea there is you can build tech around what the government needs. Let's think about TurboTax. You can file for your taxes electronically. There's always this analogy of TurboTax for immigration, but the biggest obstacle, which is connecting the government and the private sector, just hasn't happened.
Right. But one thing we can control outside the government will get there at some point.
Yeah.
I know we'll talk about it, but we on the private sector, the RMCs, the tax folks, the V&I players like, Fragment Bales, we should all be coordinated, at least to try to simplify that part of the equation. Like we did it, you come up with a model feed format that we did for the auto space and for the multifamily housing space.
Yeah, I agree. That would be a great first step. Yeah, you don't want to be. There's also challenge. It's a different conversation, but there's also challenge of like data migration. Let's say you want to go from one service provider to another, or what have you. If we talk about service, supporting our clients, we don't want to sort of trap our clients in because migrating their data is so hard. I wouldn't want to have that relationship, but I want my clients to want to work with me, not to stay with me because they're trapped.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't want to. I completely agree. So I think there'll be something there, but that one takes two to tango.
Right.
On the Envoy side, we really think the role of data and tools like that to allow us to be truly the envoy, the advisor, versus the pure, petition complete filers is a big one. We're really excited about advances in technology that we're putting a lot of money behind. We think that'll help augment the service delivery. Global, another big one. And the good news is with our affiliation with CIP, we're getting great response in the market. People are saying, oh my gosh, I always had incredible respect for CIP and Pearl like I always did. And now you get great law firm, great technology out on the West Coast. So we're really excited about that too.
So I want to ask this sort of kind of ending up here. What do you see for the future in terms of the industry? And there's this sort of push to allow law firms and non-law firms to partner and really to become one entity. I know that right now it's not possible. And so your business model where you're sort of affiliated and you work together and you have this deal is working and it's great. I mean, is there a future potentially as far as you've thought of like, well, why can't everyone be happy under one roof? Why can't the technology, the CTO and the CEO be an equity partner in this full business, right? Yeah. I mean, I think we're moving in that direction. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, we watch it quite close, as you can imagine, Roman. Yeah. And other jurisdictions obviously have done it and it works there. I think you can make an argument for access to justice. At a minimum, you need to do something because there's just too many indigent people in the United States who can't get assistance of counsel. That argument doesn't work for us, to be totally candid. But I do think in 10 years from now, there will be a relaxation. We follow this very closely, as you can imagine. You look at what's happening in Arizona, you look at what's happening in Utah. Those two jurisdictions are the furthest along with it. California is talking about it. Cook County here in Illinois, where Chicago is looking at things. Something will happen. We know the big four are dying to get in. Be careful what you wish for. I don't really, the big four's got a lot of money. If this liberalization does happen, they'll be the first ones at scale to take advantage of it. We are really bullish under the current construct. If we got to keep it separate, we think we've really got it ironed out and got it figured out with advice of counsel. But if it does liberalize, and I think something's got to happen, there's just too much pressure. And we're watch Arizona and Utah closely. Yeah,
it's interesting. And one cool thing about America is that we do have these little kind of labs. States can be their own little labs and play around with things. And then I suppose if it works, it works.
Federalism. There you go. Back to law school.
Yep. I do want to give a quick shout out here to Shiv, saying that the growing need for data is unbelievable, especially in our industry. And Shiv says firms are not doing enough, he thinks, to harness the power of data for themselves and more importantly for clients. And that certainly falls in part on the technology that's being used. It also falls in part on sometimes just what are people aware of. I think sometimes like you said, you look at the beneficiaries sometimes to lead the direction of the company, clients as well. And I think if clients know that they can and perhaps ought to ask for more data, that can push their current providers to provide them with more, that can allow them to say, all right, my current provider doesn't provide this. What else is out there? Like it changes priorities. I'll give a quick example. I was reading a thread today about someone talking about RFPs in Europe for immigration mobility providers. And there was a question of, do API conversations and like tech related questions come up in those RFPs? And that person said, not really, which I found interesting because I've been hearing for the past few years that in the immigration space, at least in the US inbound side, technology is like par for course in terms of RFPs. If you don't have good tech, if a big company is trying to move, or really any company is trying to move counsel or service providers, they want to make sure that the tech is there. So I think it's important to teach people that they should ask for it too.
Ask for it. And also, we very much believe in that. Not a surprise. And we've got a dedicated team now we're building out, Roman, for integrations alone. I mean, the amount of our existing clients, Workday is the most common one, Roman, but integrations into the HRIS or into the applicant tracking is becoming the norm. And we happily do it because we think it yields a better client experience.
Yeah. Agreed. So, I mean, this is awesome. I always like to end kind of on a fun question, but I'm curious from your perspective. You've now helped grow three tech companies. Two of them have exited in one way or another. You're obviously moving forward with Envoy Global, doing big things. Are you ever going to retire? And if you are going to retire, if you are going to retire, are you going to be in Chicago, or are you going to go somewhere else and just ski or something?
I love, you're sweet to say that. I love working. I'd drive my wife crazy if I didn't work. So I mean, my dad's 85, still working. So I want to work for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I will be in Chicago. I love Chicago's going through a hard time like a lot of big cities, but Chicago's a great town. And my wife's from here, and her family's largely here, and we're here, and we love Chicago. And I think Envoy's got an incredible opportunity for the next 10 years and longer. And I think our space has got an incredible opportunity. The need for immigration is becoming more and more clear demographically. The role of technology is getting more apparent. The power of technology. So I'm like incredibly, I got no interest in slowing down. Some of my buddies are already doing it. I'm like, you're going to be so bored.
Right.
So, yeah, I love what I do.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, that's funny. And if your dad is still working at 85, I mean, what are you going to come home and retire before him?
Exactly.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Dick, thank you so much. This was super enlightening, really interesting. Appreciate you sharing a little bit of insight, both about yourself and then, of course, about kind of where you see the industry going, and then, of course, everything that Envoy Global has done. I'm excited for the company, and generally, like you said, super bullish on the industry. I think we're just at the beginning. I think there's so much happening.
Totally agree with you. And like you said, both domestically and internationally, all these companies, and that keeps us on our toes. And I'm so grateful for the job you do, more than anyone, to be honest, of raising awareness about this. So thanks for having me, and thanks for raising awareness for this important thing we're all trying to do.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. Hey, listen, I love it. It's interesting. And I think if we can inspire more people to do more of this and to keep thinking about problems and solving problems within the industry, I think at least the work of this show is done. So yeah, thank you. Thank you again, Dick. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. What an amazing conversation. Thank you all for joining. Thank you for your awesome comments and questions. This is really exciting. I'm sure we could have stayed on for another hour fielding questions and discussing different topics. So for folks who are listening live or watching live, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. See you next week for our next show and our next guest. In the meantime, stay safe and peace out.